Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Harold Campos and today I will be speaking about extending IBM DB2 on ZOS to Microsoft SQL Server. Let's start defining what the Microsoft Service for DRDA is. The Microsoft Service for DRDA, or Distributed Relational Database Architecture, is an application server part of Host Integration Server that is also called the DRDA AS. The DRDA service converts DRDA objects and formats into corresponding Microsoft connections, commands, data types, and error objects. This allows customers to deploy new Microsoft SQL Server solutions while connecting to existing workloads based on IBM DB2. So what can we do with the Microsoft DRDA service? We can enable IBM DB2 clients such as C#, Java, COBOL, or RPG to access Microsoft SQL Server. There is a video that I published in the channel some time ago that you can visit. It doesn't have a friendly name, but you can use the link, and I will add it in the video description. It allows extending IBM DB2 on ZOS environments to Microsoft SQL Server running on premises or in Azure, and it leverages business logic written in host programming languages such as COBOL, PL1, or others to use SQL Server via IBM DB2. What are the benefits of the DRDA service? First of all, you can minimize or avoid code refactoring when conducting a gradual mainframe modernization from IBM DB2 to SQL Server. You can also manage residual data dependencies between IBM DB2 and Microsoft SQL Server after conducting a mainframe modernization. And it allows a seamless replication of data between IBM DB2 and SQL Server on premises or in Azure. Right, so if you see the picture on the right, you can see that there are multiple stages. One stage where we have COBOL programs using IBM DB2. Then we migrate. Let's say that we migrate the IBM DB2 data into SQL Server, whether it is on premises or in the cloud. And then we retarget the COBOL programs to use Microsoft SQL Server instead. We will talk more about the multiple scenarios that this enables, right? And where is it where I actually recommend following this approach. And I'll show you also a demonstration of how this works. Now, this being a distributed component, it has to be configured on ZOS and also on the Windows environment or in the cloud environment. Let's start with the configuration on ZOS. There is a component called the DB2 Communications Database, or CDB, that is basically a set of tables that are used to establish conversations with remote database management systems. There is a link with instructions that you can look into. But what I will be showing today is how to do this using a spoofie. On IBM DB2, you have to mirror SQL Server table or tables with schemas. For static SQL applications, a bind is done between IBM DB2 and SQL Server only once. Then SQL statements derived from the host programs are bound to SQL Server within the stored procedures on the target SQL Server database. And this happens with the help of Host Integration Server. And I'll show you that as well. Subsequent calls by the application use the stored procedures defined by the earlier bind. Now, at the high level, this is what happens, right? On the mainframe, you're going to have the CICS locations and CICS IP names tables, right? And then you will be updating these tables, and then that is information that will be used by the MSDRDA service.exe program or service running in Host Integration Server to go and to propagate to Microsoft SQL Server. So then the part that is configuring Windows requires the installation of Host Integration Server and enablement of the Microsoft DRDA service. You should access the msdrda service.exe.config file in the system directory of the HIS installation path. Then you should update the port that you plan to use for the DRDA service communications. This is something that, of course, it has to be done in a secure manner. You update then the connection string with the location of the SQL Server and database local or in Azure. Now, there are instructions for this as well. They are here in this slide. Now, as a general step, right? So we have three main let's say, larger steps, right, or stages. One, which is the configuration stage, where you have the ZOS and HIS configuration, where you update the IBM DB2 communications database and configure the host integration service DRDA. Then you have the bind stage, where you define the SQL statements, static or dynamic, that will be used across the environments, and the creation of the host integration server procedure, a store procedure. And this happens, you don't create it manually, right? This is something that will happen as a part of this process that I'll show you how, right? And then the execution that includes the invocation of business logic that includes calls to SQL Server. Now, there is so I'll give you a demonstration of how to accomplish this in a real mainframe. So let me get to my ISPF. So I am in ISPF now, right? And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to see my my data sets, right? I have a bunch of data sets here, but you will see something that I wanted you to notice is that I have some DRDA data sets, right? And some other data sets for other purposes, right? But I also have a data set here that is called hcampus.spoofy.input, right? That basically has the commands that I will be using to set up the first part of the configuration of the DRDA service, right? So if you see here, this hcampus.spoofy.input data set has a number of members. The members that it has, one is called customer, the other one is this log, the other one is called location, then a UPD log 1, yes, update log 1, and then update log 2, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you what I have in location, which is in this log, which is the general one, right? So if I go here to do browse, then you will see that this data set has 4 statements, right? 4 selected statements. One, select star from sysibm.locations, IP names, IP lists, and usernames. Now, so this is only a data set, so nothing happens with this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this data set to I will use a spoofy to execute the content of this data set to update, right, to show first, right, the contents of these system tables of the CDB, right, to see what they have, how the data is related, and then I will proceed to update them, right? In my case, my environment is updated already because I ran this test like 100 times, you know, but I'll show you how to do that. And once you have complete that stage, then we get into the bind stage, and I'll show you how to do the bind between the mainframe and the SQL Server, and then I'll show you how to execute the commands. So the next thing that I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to show you here the location, what the location has. It has an insert into sysibm.locations with some values. So yes, as you might be thinking right now, so these data sets, they just have instructions on how to execute the specifics on the procedure that I'm going to follow, right? So on the DRDA AS configuration. I also have one member that has a create table on a customer table, right? So this create table customer 1 has the structure of the customer table that resembles what I need to have in SQL Server to do the operations upon. So in other words, this is what happens, right? So what I'm going to do in the mainframe side is I'm going to execute a program, and this program will operate on data, right? So let's say that I am working with data locally, right? And I want to do something specific on SQL Server. So then what I have to do on my DB2 environment is I have to create an schema and a table that resembles what I'm going to have on SQL Server. So if in SQL Server I need to update a customer, so then I have to create that structure in my local schema. So then my programs locally in the ZOS environment can work with it as if it were running locally, right? It's not running locally, right? It's going to SQL Server, right? But it requires it to exist in the schema, so then it can execute operations in the remote SQL Server environment, right? So then these are the members on my data set in Spoofy. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you something else here, right? I also have here a DRDA.cob data set that has two members. One is called add customer or add cast, and the other one is called read cast. Let's start with the read cast. In the read cast member has as a content these instructions, right? And then you will see that it's a COBOL program, right? That has a definition of data types, state, and such variables, right? And what it does, it declares a cursor, and this cursor, it says that it will query the data for this customer ID 112, right? 10012. Right, and then what it does, it just returns the value, it moves some variables, and then it gets the data back, right? So then that is what the read cast has. Right now, let's browse the add cast or that customer. So the add customer, it's similar, right? It's just that instead of doing a cursor, right, what it does is it does an insert into dbo.customer, such and such. So then let's go back, right? So now we have seen the data sets. Let's go to Spoofy. For those of you who don't know what a Spoofy is a tool part of DB2, right? So let's go to more, to DB2, one Spoofy. And in Spoofy, I have, as I've been running this for a few times, this data set is set now to this log, to the member this log. So I'm gonna open this log to show the execution of the 4 statements that I have here. You see, it says IBM.locations, IP names, IP list, and usernames. Now, these 4 tables in the communications database, they have a purpose. The first one has as a purpose to show the destination of the remote environment. The second one has the IP of it, right? I'm trying to summarize it to make it as simple as possible. The third one, the IP list, let's say that you have not one SQL, but you have multiple of them, right? You have to provide high availability, right? Or load balancing. So then that's where you store multiple IPs. And the usernames is used when you have a specific security requirements or some security hardening per account, right? So then what I do is I go here to what I'll do is to the output, right? And then see that the output has exactly the data that I told you, right? In my particular case, my database is called Norwin DB2. And if I go right, then I have that this Norwin DB2 has a link name called auto NWDB, and it has a port of 50,001. So if I go back where I was, and then I scroll down, this was the locations table, right, where I have my database. Now if I go to the next one, to the IP names, I'll see that I should have a link name that is paired with the previous link name that is paired with my database. So this auto NWDB has this IP. Right now, these records, as I said, so I run this example multiple times. So, but basically, the only thing that is these jobs are doing is they are just spoofy. What I'm doing is spoofy is just inserting the data, basically, right? So it's just executing the commands that will be inserting the data. So every time that you do an update on spoofy, so then you have to run in commands. You have to run it. You have to stop the DDF, right? And then once you have stopped it, then you see that it has been successfully stopped, right? And you will see the command, right? And then you will have to start it again, right? So every time that you do an update on the CDB, you have to run these commands, right? So then once you have all of this data in the tables, and this is not the only way to do it, right? You can use any other tool to go and update the CDB. Once you have this in place, so then what you do is you go to the programs. I'm gonna go to ISPF, right? I'm gonna type the program that I show you first, DRDA, right? You will see that I have add cast and read cast, right? Let's go to read cast first, right? Yes. Now let me type here read cast. git cost. So then you will see that I have the code in here, right, that I told you about, right, the cursor, the select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to submit this and see what the status is, right? So then this job, HCompC job 062888 was submitted, right? And then it was successful, as you can see the code, right, the zeros, right? Then what I do is I'll type this to see the status of the job. And then it's 966, right, the last one. So then yeah, I've been running this a few times, and then I take a look to the bind. Why the bind? Because the first part, if you remember, what I told you is that you have to configure the CDB, right, with the information of the destination, the SQL Server that acts as a destination for DB2, and then you have to do a bind between two environments. Now, I'm going to stop here briefly because now this is the part where I go to Host Integration Server. Remember that I told you that you have to install Host Integration Server? Well, I have Host Integration Server, and in the configuration, I have enabled the service for DRDA. So this is the first thing that you do, right, on HIS. You install HIS, and then you go, you configure the environment, and then you mark this, you select the service for DRDA, right? And then afterwards, what you do is, you hit apply, and then the configuration occurs, and then a number of files are created, and one of them is the Microsoft DRDA, DRDA. Let me see, DRDA service.exe, which is a service that will be running the DRDA work, right, that we are presenting, and then there is a config file. In this config file that I just opened, right, this is where I have this port 50001 that is used by the DRDA service. This is the one that you saw in the CDB table of locations, right? And I also need to have here the connection string to the database that I will be targeting the environment. So then if I go to my SQL Server, because I already have a SQL Server in place, right? This is Norwin DB2, the name of the database that I'm using for this example, right? In programmability, I hit refresh, and I'll see that in store procedures, there is one store procedure was just created when I did the bind. So then, in other words, the bind creates an store procedure. In this case, it's called read cast, right? The name of the member that I have, it can be read, update, insert, whatever you want it to be, right? And it has the logic that is embedded to work with this particular, in this case, a table, right? Is this restricted to one table? No. You can work with multiple tables as long as you create them ahead of time, right? Something that we don't support yet is doing joins between environments, which I think, technically might make sense, but from a practical perspective, and not necessarily, because you will be doing a join across different environments, so that can impact latency. So I think this is where we get into the why would you use this feature, and I'll drill down on that. I just feel that I'm digressing. So going back to the status, to see the status of the job. So then I hit S here, and the bind, I can see that the bind was successful. So you see that there was a successful bind, and that's the reason why the store procedure was created. If it would have failed, so then this store procedure will not have been created, right? So then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back, right, to again to ISPF. I'm going to go to edit, and then instead of going to the DRDA COB dataset, I'm going to go to the job. Let me type like this: JCL read cast, right? And why am I doing this? Because this is a job. It can be any other program, but I have a job because I like jobs, batch jobs. So in this particular case, this job will exercise the procedure that we created using the bind, right? So if I go down, you will see that this is just plainly, just calling the program read cast, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit submit, right? And then this is going to the yes, then I hit enter, then I hit u.s, and then I'm going to write status of jobs, and then scroll. See that I have one more job that is called this one HCOSS. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write question mark here. And you will see that there is a sys out. So this is different than the other one, right? So there was a bind in the previous one, but in this case I have a sys out. So yes, as you can imagine, this sys out will have the results of the query for this particular customer ID 10012. So if I go to the SQL Server, right, and I look for the 10012, right, then you have exactly, so let me return this here, right, return, select top, and then I have this one, Centro Comercial Moctezuma, Francisco Chang, Marketing Manager, Sierras de Granada 9993, Mexico, Distrito Federal. No, so this is the data that he has captured. Now, remember some what I just said, right? So in the case of in this particular case, I had a member that that ran a query. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to run the member, right, that is called addcast, F3 addcast, right? So, but before running this, I need to create the store procedure. So I need to do the bind, right? So then I do submit. So I'll do yes and equals u.s, right, status, and then the next job, right, again, so I won't be seeing, well, this is an insert, so it's going directly, right, it has a sys out because I asked to return this particular job, right, is returning a status code. So let me show you here, right, it says that the insert has been completed, right, as opposed to the previous one that I did in 2 steps. This one did everything all together. So I did the insert, right, in the same call. So because this job is programmed to do so. So then if I go to my SQL Server, hopefully it's not gonna let me down, right? And then one more record should appear here. So I'm gonna run the query again. And then yes, exactly. You have the company Harold Soft, Harold C, MVP, address, Oakville, region 2, zip, Canada, and additional information that was part of the job. You know, I think so with this, this finishes the demonstration. But one thing that I wanted, well, a few things that I wanted to leave you as takeaways. If you're looking to migrate from IBM DB2 to Microsoft SQL Server with minimal, in most cases, none changes to your C#, COBOL, RPG, or Java programs, then you should be using the Microsoft DRDA service part of Host Integration Server. If you have mainframe or mid-ranges applications and need to integrate with Azure, then you can use Host Integration Server and/or Azure Logic Apps. And I think this one is it's very important or critical in many cases, right? The Microsoft DRDA service is a cost-effective solution for integrating environments using Microsoft SQL Server and IBM DB2. SQL Server processing costs are typically cheaper than other specialized environments, right? I think that that's the whole idea of cloud and economy of scale, right? So if you can offload your data from the host into SQL Server, so then you will be paying just for the consumption of the VMs and the storage of it, right? But anyway, so I think with that, I wanted to thank you for your time. I hope you found this content interesting. Please subscribe to the channel. If you have questions about this topic or about Host Integration Server, about BizTalk Server, Logic Apps, please email me or reach out in LinkedIn. And you can also follow me in X at HCampusU. Thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of the day.